Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. It's going to be a very poignant and a very deep session. So sit down and prepare yourself for this one. I'm very honored to have Wing Commander Jacqui Wilkinson from the Royal Air Force. Jacqui has written last year this book, Turning the Tables on Trauma. And I have read it, a survivor story of child sex abuse. So it's going to be a powerful conversation, and where someone has chosen to become a victor, not a victim. Jacqui, welcome, and thank you for being on the Inspiring Leadership podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Jonathan. It's an honour and a privilege to be here.
Well, certainly for me, it definitely is. And you're also very kindly cycling, because you're one of those super fit athletes that anybody knows. Dave Ward, who was in the RAF himself, was very impressed by your prowess as a heptathlete. We'll talk about that later on. But also, you're getting stuck into all sorts of things. You're coming to ride with us on the Ride to Inspire, which is to help the victims of violence against women and girls and children. So very dear to your heart. You've also done a podcast with Lee on the Inspiring Women Leaders podcast, and she was very, very impressed by how you spoke, and you're going to be speaking at the event. So let's talk about what you're doing right now. There's so many things you've been involved in the last couple of years, but tell us about what you're doing now in the Royal Air Force and the many strings to your bow.
Thank you. So I'm currently overseas serving in Italy in the NATO headquarters, working in the operations division. And that's keeping me busy. And on a personal perspective, since I wrote my book, Turning the Tables on Trauma, the trajectory in my life of what I want to do has significantly changed because I've realized that despite everything that all the challenges that happened to me, I've now found pain, that pain has become a purpose. And I want to help other people overcome and understand how you can all like turn the tables and understand yourself when you've got unresolved trauma that may have happened decades ago or years ago or just last year, and how you can actually educate yourself from within, because the Latin word educo means to develop from within. The potential is always within you. The answers are always within you. You know, the mind that holds the problem holds the solution. And that's when we understand it is really empowering, and we can choose to become whoever we want to become despite the cards that we've been dealt in life. Sometimes we feel like we get unlucky, but actually it's the way you perceive life that actually makes the difference. You know, things will happen. It's your perception of it that helps you to overcome. So I've kind of pivoted towards this journey of empowering others through that self-education to help evolve thinking, because we can all reach our true potential when we actually fully understand ourselves. And the research that I've done, 3 decades of research, has really helped me understand that, to lead me to a place where it once was really dark, when I had a breakdown, but to enlightenment, you know, really
Mm.
deep enlightenment and fulfillment and happiness. And I just want to be able to share that with so many people. I'm in the process of writing a course, an online course that will help bring that out of, you know, and help people uncover and unlock things that where they may be stuck in life. So this is just a journey, and it's just the beginning, if I'm totally honest. But it's a calling. When you get
Mm.
this in your life and it happens, it pulls you in ways. So I'm doing a lot of speaking now. I'm part of the uh, Los Angeles Tribune Women's Journal, where I wrote an article, and that was published this year. And I do many speaking opportunities with the Los Angeles Tribune, just about leadership events. I was on the LA Leadership Week, and also the Global Women's Leadership Summit. And it's really to kind of highlight that vulnerability and authenticity are strengths, even if you are in the military. And when you own your story, you own your life.
Mm.
And this is really empowering for anyone who's in a leadership role, is that when we lead with courage and we show people that you can actually be who you want to be by leading with courage and owning your story, it helps others because it gives them the permission to own their own story and then face things that they might not necessarily want to face or deal with, but they've locked away for many years thinking it will go away. but it doesn't.
We'll certainly get you to talk about the actual events of your life and how that's created a calling for you, that you own your story and you own your life. And I think what I've really appreciated in our conversations, but also in your book, a lot of people can have the rhetoric. They got a great story. They tell things, but actually, it's not the reality of how you're experiencing it with them. They've swallowed a book on a course, or they've read a consulting book, and they're just regurgitating quotes. And it's a bit like sort of, is it Michael McIntyre, or is it? Let me think. One of those ones who just comes out with the one-liners.
Mm.
And you've got a real story that stops you in your tracks, which we'll hear about in a moment. And this podcast is called the Inspiring Leadership Podcast for a reason. That leaders like you have inspired so many others. It certainly inspired me and my wife. And in your course, it would be useful to weave that in with Inspiring Leadership Foundation, because there's so many young people who'd love to hear your story and to lift them up. So I know you're going to stay in touch with Lee, but please do help us with that, weaving in your story into the people around the world that we're helping. We're off to Nepal shortly because there's trafficking into the sex trade of girls from Nepal into India, and we're working with Himalaya Tapa and his wife Bina, and the charities there. So there's so many lives that you can touch. On the Inspired Leadership Podcast, I always ask leaders like you to recommend and speak about other people that you find inspiring, because if you're an inspired leader and you find someone else inspiring, we know we're on to a rich vein of good leadership advice. So you talked about Richard and Frank. Tell us about Richard and Frank.
Yeah, so Richard Gamage retired. He was a part of the athletics team, the Royal Air Force Athletics team for many years. He was an exceptional athlete himself. I think he still holds the pole vault record, the inter-services, by quite a long way, quite a long height or high height. But his leadership on the track and field was phenomenal. He was the president of the committee, but he just, when he was around, his energy, how he inspired us, and he was still competing probably to the day when he retired, was just phenomenal. So he really gave us like inspiring leadership whilst we're on the track and field, and I'm really grateful. He also reached out saying that he'd purchased my book, and he wanted to read it because he wanted to understand more about trauma-informed leadership, which I thought was phenomenal. And it's like, yes, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for understanding and for sharing that with me. So he is an exceptional person who I would like to recognise. And then the second person is also on the athletics track, who was my coach and my mentor. And he was the men's team leader. He's a decathlete himself, warrant officer, Frank Chapman. He's been phenomenal in that whole team, and he saw me in the gym at Royal Air Force Odium many years ago, and just like, come and do athletics, and encouraged me to do heptathlons, which are 7 events. And there was a lot of doubt, lots of doubt in my mind, lots of nerves, but he was always there picking me up, going, you can do this, and just changing those beliefs into empowering beliefs as opposed to limiting beliefs. So, and he doesn't even realize like how phenomenal he is. So he's someone who I've always been inspired by.
That's just the kind of leader I want. I find when people send me someone, an agency normally, and they go, this person says he's great and he's paid us to tell you he's great. Can he come on the podcast? And I had to have that conversation with somebody from an agency. I said, I don't think it's the right podcast for you. I like people who are recommended by other inspiring leaders where there's no money exchanged. It's just you're recommending these two people because you know them to be good. And that's been the time worn success of this podcast, almost 400 episodes now. So I'm going to keep that way. I'm not going to go so much for the agencies unless they are people we all know. So thank you for that. I think now is the time to share the essence, and in 10 minutes, how do you share a whole lifetime in a book of the adverse childhood experiences that you had, and how life began so horrendously, but yet you've made something of it. So really, your origin story, please, if you'd share it.
Yeah, thank you. So I was dealt a hand of 9 adverse childhood experiences. And for those who are not sure what that actually means, the, the research is that there was a study done by Kaiser Permanente, who are a health insurance and health provider in California. And they did it with the Center for Disease and Control. And they surveyed 17,000 people, trying to understand why certain people were dying younger than others and what was the correlation. And the study illustrates that the ACEs strongly relate to a person's well-being throughout life. And the higher the number of ACEs that you have, the greater the negative outcomes on life. And actually, that 7 out of the 10 leading causes of death are attributed to ACEs. So they are really impactful, but we don't even realize. And the 10 ACEs are sexual, physical, emotional abuse, and emotional and physical neglect. But it's also a dysfunction that happens in the household. So it's abuse that happens to the child, but also a child witnessing stuff. So this is when a child's between the age of 0 and 18. So the household dysfunction could be domestic violence, witnessing your parents being volatile towards each other, growing up with a parent who is depressed or on substances like drugs or alcohol, but also a volatile divorce is an ACE, and incarceration, so a parent going to prison. And all of these contribute to a life where you could turn to maladaptive coping strategies, which could lead to an onset of chronic diseases, inflammations, employment challenges, all of those things. And if you have more than 6 ACEs, they say that you're more likely going to end up in prison. So I was dealt a hand of 9 from both my parents. And I just thought that that's normal. What they're doing to me is, and how they are and how they interact with both me and themselves is completely normal. But it's not. And when you grow up with a lot of dysfunction, there were some days that there were good days on the, good times on the bad days and bad times on the good days. It was a bit like that, ebbing and flowing. But on the bad days, it was really sad and lonely. So I grew up quite isolated, not believing in myself. I didn't have any self-worth, and the only time I achieved self-worth was by doing things on the outside. So all of the voids that I had in my life, I filled them up by super achieving, because I believed that if I could achieve this, that I'm worth something. Or if I could, get this accolade or achievement, then, I'm enough. And sadly, you could keep chasing achievements and accolades, but that doesn't really give you deep fulfillment. But I learned the hard way. I learned the long way that actually that's not what leads to it. So I super achieved. I went to university, got 3 degrees rather than just the one, because then I'm better, right? And then I joined the Royal Air Force thinking, this will, be great. But when I joined the Royal Air Force, I just chose to put all of my trauma into a box and lock it away, because I believe that if anyone knew how my parents treated me and how my life was as a child, they would not think that I'm good enough to be a leader. They would not think that I'm of the higher caliber to be an officer. So I was like, no one will know that my parents are this way. And that was probably one of the worst things I could have done. Before I went to university, I went to counselling, and I really started to unlock my mind and understand how my behavior was, which reinforced and gave me the strength and courage and confidence to actually apply to join the Royal Air Force. However, and everything was fine, and I kept chasing promotion after promotion. But then I returned from Afghanistan, and the wheels started to fall off. And why this was happening is because there was a splitting of the selves. And what I mean by a splitting of the selves is that there was the Jacqui in uniform, the strong victor mindset that, I'm not weak. And then there was a Jacqui who in her personal life was having troubles. The mental health stigma is there, is that I can't show weakness. What will people think? That kind of thing. And I realized, because I went to therapy, I realized that I had to start being honest with close friends in the military. And I spoke to my therapist, and she asked me one really poignant question. And she said, "Who would Jacqui be without all the accolades and achievements?" And I said, "I would be no one. I'd be invisible." And that's a really sad place to be.
Mm.
So I was like, no, I need to start owning my story because I'm not invisible. My life does matter. And I started sharing my story with friends, and I felt validated. I felt seen and heard. And I was allowed to just be who I was, and I wasn't judged. And I was like, oh, this is okay. And thankfully, I've got amazing friends who are very empathic, which allowed me then to continue to share. And everything was fine for a while. And then I got promoted to squadron leader. Everything's fine, you go on your professional way. But then something happened. This is in 2016, which really completely rocked my world. And my father passed away. And then he, as my abuser, he was no longer in my life, but he he left a kind of a thought that, where's my justice? What he's done to me and how he's impacted my life, where is my justice? And I hit rock bottom, and I was diagnosed with complex PTSD at the time. And the reason for this was because there were so many bits of unresolved trauma that I hadn't really dealt with. Because I'd locked stuff away in the box, I was able to cope professionally. But on a personal level, I was not living by my true values. I was misaligned. The selves had split, and I had to reconnect the selves inside of me to be whole and one. And that's spirituality. So I had to relearn all of that. And I did. I faced this head on, a bit like a buffalo decides to walk through the storm instead of like turning away from it and allowing it to just impact you every day. That like cloud of negativity. No, I'm going to face this on, and I did. And I started researching how does child abuse affect an adult's behavior, and how can we change? And what I started to uncover was phenomenal. And I put all of this into a master's dissertation, which is how primary socialization shapes how we narrate our adult behaviors and how that develops our leadership. And in doing that writing and research, I uncovered so much, and I was able to change a lot of my behaviors. And then fast forward the me search that I did, because I wrote an autoethnography, which is where you write a personal story, but it's rooted in academic research. And then you analyze, is that my reality as well? Or is that just the reality of other people? And when you realize that your reality is very similar to other people's reality, it lessens your shame. And then you realize, actually, we are more similar than we at first care to sort of admit. But when we do, it's just so profound and so healing. And here we are. So that's why I wrote the book.
Wow. Well, having read your book, and I do recommend people read Turning the Tables on Trauma, it was so powerful and so hard hitting. I mean, you've skimmed across the details, but the book goes into the details of what your father did to you and your mother as an alcoholic, and just not being there for you, and you having to do so much yourself. It really profoundly hit me. And the fact that you've made something of this is what I look for in all leaders, that they've had these experiences which have shaped the people they are today and made them better leaders from the trauma and the awful things they went through. You've just reminded me, only just now as you were talking, I was with Lee actually in the post office tower listening to a financial multimillionaire who then climbed mountains and did all sorts of things. Just any challenge, he'd take it on. And he actually broke down on the talk because he talked about being sexually abused as a boy by a man, he'd said it, trying to correct this distortion, this abuse, had driven him on. And I come across so many leaders. I'm very driven myself. Lee's very driven. who've had our own issues that have caused us to try and prove people wrong, that we are worth something, that we are not invisible if we don't add in all the achievements in life. But it certainly has driven so many people I know to achieve extraordinary results from what is apparently ordinary lives. But you don't know their story and you don't know what's driving them. And sometimes you think, oh, I wish I could live their life. I wish I could be like them. They're so successful. But you don't know their story. You don't know what they've been through. And your story of, farming family and, appeared to other people all was normal. You sort of think, oh, it's only in the poorest areas when Lee and I go to, some of the slum areas of Nairobi. You go, well, you can understand it happening there. But no. This is middle class or upper class families where we've helped people where the mother was being prostituted out by Serbian gangs and the children were being abused and used by the Serbian gangs in London in a £3 million house. And so don't ever judge anybody else. You do not know what they're going through. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, never judge a book by its cover. It's one of the oldest, sort of the dearest proverbs that I hold, because you never know what someone's life journey has been on the day that you meet them. And if people hold masks up, you may never know their story. So I've always had the leadership stance of treat people with kindness and with empathy and without judgment, because if you do lead with judgment and you're like, oh, well, that happened to me, and then dismiss or just be dismissive, you can just put that person into a place where they'll never ask for help.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we just don't judge, because we will never know.
In fact, you remind me of my newsletter. I just talked about the late Robin Williams, who said, always be kind to other people. You don't know what they're going through.
No.
Just be kind, give them a chance. But in your book, Turning the Tables on Trauma, you are incredibly honest about this journey of adversity and awful abuse. And when you decided to share your story, how did it change your relationship with both vulnerability and leadership, both personally and with colleagues in the Royal Air Force?
Yeah, great question. So, as I mentioned previously, when I joined, I locked everything into a box and threw away the key. But actually, when I started sharing, and initially it was with close friends, then it became with colleagues, then it was subordinates, then it was superiors. So it's a step-by-step thing. I built shame resilience. And shame is shame and guilt are powerful emotions that can be quite debilitating in how we show up in the world. And what shame resilience means is that it comes out when we speak our truth, when we feel we're heard, we're seen, and validated, because it kind of dismisses the self-doubt, and especially the self-loathing as well, which I had about who I was. But that sharing helps you change, because it allows you to more deeply connect in your personal relationships, your professional relationships. So your relationships aren't just that superficial, hello, how are you? You okay? They're deeper. And so I don't tend to have superficial relationships anymore. They're quite deep. So either people are ready for those conversations or they're not ready. And then, you know where you are. But that's
Well,
just who I
welcome to
am
our
now.
world. Welcome to
Yeah.
our world.
And it's so much more enjoyable to really discuss things with depth. So it allows for greater human connection, and that's what life's all about. But also, this enabled me to allow faith to drive my behavior and not fear. So when you start sharing, it gives you faith that you're not alone and that other people are going through this.
Yeah.
You have to find the courage to step out. But yeah, it's amazing.
Well, it's I'm smiling here as I replied to Jacqui for those listening, because I did an off-site event last week, and I've got one in about 2 weeks' time, where the group of 14 of us shared our life stories and some of the highs and the lows and how it's shaped the leader we are today. And when I went first, followed by the leader, she went next. you could see the room change and readjust because they thought, I'm just going to skim across the surface,
Yeah.
just give a few things. And they went, oh no, this is deep. I mean, this is vulnerable. This is raw. This is open. And we'd set the boundaries of how it was, and it wasn't to discuss it with anybody else. It was just in the room, and you can't even discuss it with the person who's raised it over lunch or something, unless they want to raise it with you. It's their story, and just respect that. So you have to set the boundaries, as you know, for psychological safety. But one or two of them afterwards, when we reflected on how they respected each other more, having heard their personal stories, they went, "This is a game changer. I thought I knew my colleagues here. I've worked with them for 10 years. I just did not know them."
Mm.
And I have so much more trust and respect
Yeah.
for them because of what they've been through. And their vulnerability is a strength.
Yeah.
And and I know with the boss of the next session, he doesn't want to do these sort of touchy feely things. He's a techie, and like, let's not get into feelings. But I'm going to take him there, and with the team as well, because they want to have more trust. And there's this superficial skimming across the surface kind of conversations, no real openness. So they're not building trust. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I completely agree. I think we're not used to it. We are used to brushing things under the carpet as a culture. But if you choose to move away from that and start sharing, it has this snowball effect because being courageous is contagious. And so what you did just then is that you had this conversation, the room adjusted. It's like, oh, I can also share. And in doing so, people then were able to just like own their story more. And that is the snowball effect. That's a ripple effect of leadership when we're able to step into our vulnerability and authenticity and lead from that space. It just allows others to do the same and mirror.
You're so right. And you've also reminded me, I was thinking about the generational cycles of abuse and what's passed on.
Mm.
And you talk about shuffling the deck of adverse childhood experiences and building resilience and healing. Just share a sick story, and I want to hear your thoughts about this topic. I was with Sergeant Barker, who was one of my platoon sergeants when I was in the Green Howards. And he very kindly, he and his wife invited me as a young officer over to have an evening meal with them in Germany, in their block of flats, which they shared with other soldiers. And while we were having the meal, there was a huge fight going on upstairs, and it must have been another soldier. So um, Sergeant Barker went, I know which soldier that is. He's in our company. Let's go and see if we can resolve this. Because, of course, in those days, there's no welfare help. As the company commander, you and your wife were expected to sort out the welfare. I mean, there's no system there, and it was just chaotic. We went up, we knocked on the door, and the private soldier came to the door. He had blood dripping down his face.
Mm.
He clearly had a fight, and the wife had smacked him in the nose, it turns out. And he had a little girl who was about, I don't know, 4 or 5. And he was taking the blood and wiping it into her hair as he was talking to us.
Mm.
And clearly things were not right at all. Not only just the fight between them, but the way they were treating their children. We got it investigated. It turned out that they were abusing sexually their children. He'd been abused by his parents, so it was passing it on through the generations. What's the practical mindset shifts you recommend for leaders who want to foster resilience and healing for themselves and the teams when you've got some of those kind of stories going on in the background?
Yeah, no, that's it just makes me sad because it is passed down through generations, and obviously the adult now becomes the abuser, and you've got to. It's it's forgiveness. One of the things I learned was when you have forgiveness in your life, you let go of the anger and the resentment, which leads to reacting to scenarios, which creates that volatility behavior, which then creates the abuse, right? So, forgiveness was a key thing for me that I had to learn to overcome. And when people say, well, what you forgive what your father did, and I was like, I don't condone what he did. I don't condone what my mother did, but I've let go of the resentment. I've let go of, oh, where's my justice? Like that kind of adamancy that I had in my younger years, because now letting go, you let go of that anger and resentment, and then that allows you to just be and respond in situations and not react. So it's all part and parcel of it. So that was the one thing that, people don't necessarily forgive, and find that forgiveness in their heart. But you said about reshuffling the deck, but you can't reshuffle the deck unless you first have all the cards on the table. And you've got to face those cards on. And what I mean by that is you've got to look at yourself really deeply and go, why am I behaving the way I'm behaving? And when you acknowledge those behaviors, and where is that coming from? And look at it with curiosity and kindness, not judging yourself. And when we get to that level of conscious awareness, that is when real healing and change happens. And what I mean by that is you swap the maladaptive coping strategy mechanisms that you might be using by numbing, etc., with actually conscious choices. And that's really key. So for me, I think the key mindset things are self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-approval, and self-appreciation. Those four things will actually lead to self-actualization. And that's the reconnecting of the selves, because there'll be perhaps parts of yourselves that you don't like, and you want to, yeah, I don't like that part of myself, but actually you need to reconnect all of them. And that's really crucial.
It really is powerfully explained in your book as well. And I've been on a journey for myself in the last 4 years. I did 11-day silent Vipassana Buddhist retreat. I went on the Hoffman process, which I recommend to everybody listening. And I've had
Yeah.
the managing director from the Hoffman process. I also went and did sort of plant-based medicine in Peru, which was quite fun. And I did the Mankind Project, which is about men coming together and accepting the lives they've been through and what they've been through, but being much kinder to the women in their lives and just being better humans. With my friend Jeff Nishwitz, who's been on this podcast as well. The reason I share all those is it was such a profound journey, particularly in the Hoffman process, where I wrote a letter to my ex-wife to apologize for my behavior and to wish her every success in her life and all that goes on, and various other letters, and was able to go through certain processes where I could let go of things that had happened that I'd missed, or funerals of my grandmother, or the death of my father when I was 2, and that I was without him ever since. And it allows me to remove the mask. I think often you and I, certainly in the forces, we have to put on a mask. There's a certain way of behaving as an officer, and when you're high achieving, it's not about vulnerability. It's about super strength and appearing to be perfect. I'm much happier in my place of imperfection and not wearing the mask anymore, that I can have this conversation with you. I couldn't have had this 10 years ago, this level of conversation, and also recognizing the power of the book you wrote. And I wish it for so many of the leaders that you and I meet and work with, that they can take off the mask and be okay being themselves at work and the same person at home.
Yeah.
But so many of them feel they have to be one version of themselves there and the other one. And that disintegrated personality is not the integrated inspiring leader, it's the disintegrated.
Yep.
There's bits missing from it. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, no, it's what I said about the splitting of the cells. It's exactly what I did. And you are one whole human being. We are holistic in our health, mind, soul. And when you're behaving in a certain way because, oh, I should be behaving like this, I should be doing this, I should, it's not authentic. And that's a challenge, and it creates more anxiety and stress. Whereas if you just be who you are, and there's only one of you, and you're amazing. Just be who you are, despite whether you're wearing a uniform or not. That's really key. And you can still show up as your best self, and you can still be strong. But it's accepting that. I used to think that weakness was debilitating, but now I know it's a strength. And because I'm talking about it more, it's becoming more strength, and I'm developing strength from my scars, which is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, well, one of the key messages in your book that I took away a lot, I made lots of notes. I'm dyslexic, so it took me longer to read it. You're going to have to do an audio version,
Who knows?
You are
Yeah.
for that huge number of us who are dyslexic, because I read audio wise 3 books a week. And I've been doing that for about 5 years. That's an awful lot of books.
Yeah.
And but when I was younger, I struggled to read. So there's a whole group out there that you would touch the lives of those men and women by doing an audio version. So that's your next challenge,
You're
right?
not the only one that's asked me that.
That's your next challenge. And I know that having I'm writing my third book at the moment, which is you're going to be in it, which is the CEO's compass, how to navigate teams through turbulent times, and you're doing that, and you're helping others. But you talked about a key message that abuse thrives in secrecy. And so I'm interested in your advice for leaders, whether military or civilian, who want to create environments where there are courageous conversations about trauma and mental health, that it can happen in a psychologically safe and constructive way. What's your advice?
Safety first. So safety is created by example, by sharing, your story, even if it's just a little, and that creates that, that psychological safety we talked about. And psychological safety is like every voice matters. So your team, their story matters, their opinion matters, where they're not going to be persecuted or brought down because of saying what they need to say. That is fundamental in having a thriving team, whether that's talking about your own personal story or just talking about, a project where you think this will be successful or this won't work. Everyone has a voice and everyone has a different perception and perspective, and it really does matter. So that's really important. We spoke about before that when leaders normalize the stigma of mental health by saying, yeah, me too, rather than you should do this or you should that, it actually changes the culture, because abuse thrives in secrecy. But I think that healing breathes in truth and owning our stories. And that's what's really powerful about, being honest about our story. And I said before that being courageous is contagious. Johari window, that's a theory there where I share a little bit and then you're like, oh, I can share as well. Those theories exist, and in reality, they are very, very powerful. And, it gives other people the permission to share their own story, to be heard. And that's where you get a follower, a person who works for you that doesn't just lead because you're the leader. They lead because they want to follow you, because they believe in you.
Yeah, such great experience and also advice. And that sort of leads me on to another thought, which is you talked about primary socialization. And I'm interested in how you empower and support others, particularly the survivors in high pressure environments like the military. Because I imagine when I think about the private soldier there was an awful lot of the soldiers who themselves have been through abuse. One of my guests the other day, who's just climbed Everest, special forces, but he grew up in a children's home. Mum was a crackhead, dad was abusive and never around. He just was on the streets and was in a children's home. And in the children's home, they didn't supervise it. So pedophiles came in and abused the girls, and they abused the boys like him.
Mm.
And that was in a children's home where you think they should be safe, and they're not. It was attracting the weirdos like Jimmy Savile and the like. So the survivors within high pressure environments like the military, any advice and experience you'd give to people listening?
Yeah, so leadership is about how you show up for others, and I've got a story and I talk about it in my book, because it's really powerful. Um, this is back in 2008, and I was a flight commander, so commanding officer for a section. I just arrived, and I was warned about a certain individual who was showing up late. His story was he's always trouble, he's always off sick, he's not performing. I think we need to do action on him to get rid of him, because he's no good. And so I called him in for a chat, and I brought the sergeant in as well as backup, because I was really warned about this individual. And what I saw in front of me was not a man who was who was defiant. It's a man who was struggling and drowning in negative emotions, shame, and long held beliefs that he was not good enough. And how that played out is that he had no goals, no motivation. He escaped home at the age of 16. And then his only one goal was to join the RAF, which he did. And then he had no goal. He had nothing else to aspire to. So he was just starting to unravel. And the conversation I had with him was, I shared part of my story in the fact that I'd gone for help, and that how I saw going to seek therapy was actually mind training. And I said, did you, before you learned how to load and offload an aircraft and you had that training, would you have known how to do it? And he said, well, no. I was like, well, have you ever had training on your mind? And he was like, well, no. I was like, well, just think of it as mind training. And when you understand how your thoughts control your emotions, which then control your behaviors, and that you have the power to actually change those thoughts, behaviors, and feelings to a more positive place, you will empower your life. And so off he went and did that. And then, 15 years later, he's at the pinnacle of his RAF career. He's studying a master's. He's on the CAS fellowship doing his PhD. He's absolutely in an amazing place. And that is because he chose to go and seek help when he needed it most. And he listened. And the reason that I was then able to share with him, this is what I think you should do, because this is what I did and it transformed my life. And it did. And he said that, his son now is, a national Welsh swimmer who wants to go on and become a doctor and study medicine. And so he was like, you've transformed 2 generations. And the ripple effect started with that one simple conversation where I could have just said, right, you're out, you're gone, and everyone else had given up on him. But I saw the truth in him and I saw his potential. And then I gave him that gift.
I really love that, Jacqui. And in the years I've got left to live, I have given myself the life purpose of inspiring leadership in the people I meet and the leaders who are there, who will influence the lives of people I may never meet.
Yeah.
And you've done that, not only in your book, but in the work you've done in the Royal Air Force and what you're going to be doing next. What's your vision of how organizations can support the survivors of childhood trauma to find their voice like you have and thrive like he did and you did?
I think it's just open your eyes and become aware of what's hidden all around us, what's hiding in plain sight. When the World Health Organization did a report, a mental health report, in 2021. And what they said is that more than half of all children aged between, I think it was 2 and 17, that's around 1 billion individuals, experienced emotional, physical, or sexual violence in the previous year. And these adverse childhood experiences, including exposure to violence, and an increase of risk of it basically develops behavioral problems as you grow up as an adult, and that increases mental health conditions from depression, anxiety to PTSD. So if that's 1 billion individuals in 2021, that's our next generation workforce. We need to be aware statistically of what is going on and this epidemic that's happening globally, because when we are leaders, when we can see that actually they just need kindness and empathy and support as opposed to being dismissed, we can help change the world. And that to me is what organizations can do, is really understand like what happens to people. And people are people. When you join the military, you get given a uniform, but you don't get given attributes of you're completely solid and you'll never, you can't change your past. You don't get given these attributes of like strength. You are who you are. So it's really important that we give each organizations the awareness and the trauma-informed leadership that's really desperately needed.
No, I'm really, really, really thinking about that and just how ill-prepared people are for what life's going to throw at them and the amount of mental health issues that we've got. And you also in your book shared that there are 1 in 8 girls or women, 370 million of them have gone through rape or sexual abuse in the last year.
Yep.
I mean, that's just a staggering figure. And also what we don't talk about is the men who go through physical abuse from their partner or sexual abuse from somebody else, another adult, and don't know what to do about it, and then pass it on to the next generation. It's a shocking figure. Any thoughts that come from that of what we can do?
I think when something happens to you and you experience a traumatic event, is don't bury it.
Mm.
Just like if you leave a pot on the stove with boiling with water, when the pressure builds up, a bit like unresolved trauma, it will bubble over into your life. So actually, what we can do by lessening the pressure and reducing the flames is by understanding ourselves better and becoming really aware of why am I behaving in that way at that time? What's going on? And we can get to change, and neuroscience is showing us that we can rewire our brains. I'm a certified hypnotherapist now, and I know even more powerfully how you can actually do that. And it's really important that we all have this innate skill that we can change. But abused people go on to abuse if it's unresolved, but they were also a child who was abused as well. So I now look at, and that's what happened to my father. He was abused, sexually abused, but then he didn't resolve it, and then he passed it on to me. And this is what happens. So, but we get to stop, we get to change, and we get to go, no, enough's enough. I'm going to draw a line here, because we all have to take accountability for our own behavior as adults. That is my responsibility. So for the sake of my two children who are now 8 and 6, I made a choice to change my behaviors, to own it and transform. And we all get to do that. So hopefully, I think Dr. Gabor Mate is a phenomenal physician. He said that if you can just lessen the abuse that you were given, we can help heal the world. And I completely agree with that. So, but we all have that capability within us. We just need to learn what the root cause is and resolve it.
Yeah, and it makes me also think something very close to my heart, and my family was my brother was stabbed by um, another surgeon who broke into his home and tried to burn the family alive. That man has just been committed for a minimum of 22 years. He's served 4 already for what he did to my brother and his family. But he never accepted personal accountability, even in the court. It was never his fault. It's always everybody else. And throughout his life, all that had gone on, it was the nurses. It wasn't him. Any fault was never his. And I come across so many people like this. There's this funny mix I have. On the one hand, I want to be understanding and non-judgmental about people. On the other hand, there are some people who are so self-promoting, so narcissistic, like certain presidents of certain countries. And there's no help for them, because they just think they're always right about everything, and it's never their fault. And they retell the story just after, when we know the facts. And so there's part of me which goes, give everybody a chance, but at the same time, don't be naive, because there are some really evil men and women out there who will do very evil things to other people, but you don't know their story. It doesn't really help you when you're being stabbed by them, but there may be reasons why they behave like that. But I do think you raise a good point about, I've got to take parental accountability for my life. I can't do anything about your life. I mean, I can influence it, but I mean, we often think, this brings me to almost a rambling way of saying, you talked about cognitive behavioral therapy, which really helped you, and stoicism, this acceptance of it's not the event, it's how we think about the event that shapes our life and what we then do. Do you want to just talk a bit about perhaps stoicism and how it helps us cope with what life gives us?
Yeah, it reminds me of learned helplessness. You can either go, oh yeah, blame other people, and say, well, this happened to me, therefore that I am the way I am because of that. Or, you can choose a different way. And I believe that you can't dream yourself into a character. You must hammer and forge yourself into one. And I think Aristotle once said that, good habits happen when, you turn virtues into habits. And it's what you do consistently every single day that shapes who you are and who you become. And this is like the accountability, the buck stops with me, despite what's happened. That's the life that you can choose to live. And that's what I've always done. I've always learned, how can I be the absolute opposite of what happened to me, and always striven, to go after that goal. So
It's a really good point you make. And I find now catching even a thought early on, before it sort of embeds itself like a seed and starts to grow. What's that old saying? I'll probably get it wrong, but sow a thought, reap a deed, sow a deep deed, reap a habit, sow a habit, reap a character, sow a character, reap a whirlwind, a destiny. That be
yeah.
very careful that even some unpleasant thoughts about people. I know we can't be perfect, and oh, life is great, isn't it wonderful? Roses and sunny rainbows and things. There's the aspect of being realistic, but I do think the only person around here I can change is myself, and the only person you can
Mm.
change is Jacqui Wilkinson. But what is so exciting about the work that you're doing, Jacqui, is I still remember when I was working in Penna, a very experienced, sage old um, executive search guy who was wanting to become a coach. He said, "Jonathan, the way you behave makes me think about the way I behave." And it's really stopped me in my tracks to relook again at how I'm showing up.
Mm.
Now, as we all know from my stories and things, I've made way more mistakes than you're ever going to make, Jacqui. So I'm full of faults, but I'm work in progress. And until the day I die, I'm still going to be a bit like Marcus Aurelius, who was caught in just about a couple of years before he died on his way to his tutor to have some teaching. And they were, well, what's the point of you doing this? You're an old man. He goes, I'm always work in progress, always learning until the very end. And I get the sense that you are a lifelong learner, aren't you? I mean, I know you're driven as obsessively as I am, but I think that will make you make a difference to the lives of the people that you're going to help, because I'm sure you're already touching so many people's lives. And I just want to say thank you for what you're doing to support Lee and myself and the Inspiring Leadership Foundation. I do think, your message can get out to those young girls and women and young men about how they show up and how they think. And before we go into the top tip, what's your final thing that you'd like to share? Any message you'd like to get to people listening in 125 countries around the world?
Yeah. So I think that healed people heal people. And when you go through such a challenging life and you choose not to give up, you choose to keep going. And when you fall down, you pick yourself up, but learn why, and understand that failure is feedback, and it's all about, progress over perfection. I think all of these things really matter because it shifts your mindset. It shifts your mindset to, I can do this, and turning the impossible into the possible. So I've completely shifted my mindset in a more positive way. Before I was just super achieving, but there was still this negativity of doubt and lack of confidence. And now it's shifted in a light that actually I can help, hopefully people heal through my own pain, and that is really empowering.
Yeah, and I think failure is feedback. I was honored to give a keynote address to all the headmasters and headmistresses of all the top boarding schools in the country about 3 weeks ago, and it was quite daunting because I failed in many things. In fact, I began the whole of my talk about my failures. I thought I even failed my maths exam. My calculator broke down on me. I couldn't count on it anymore. Oh dear, that ought to. But I said that they were not an end itself. I'm not celebrating failure. These were stepping stones to me learning something. And I picked up from one of the professors who taught me about this concept of a teachable moment. That this isn't failure. Nelson Mandela said, "I either succeed or I learn something."
Mm.
But we go, okay, hasn't worked out. One, what have we learned? And two, now what? What are we going to do? What action are we going to take? And I think, you're brought up in the Royal Air Force as I am in my days in the Army about after action reviews. What have we learned? What are we going to do? And I think rather than just sitting there and going, woe is me, it's gone wrong, what have you learned? What are you going to do? So we're now at the perfect place, Jacqui. Would you kindly, for this own standalone piece, say who you are, the work you're doing now, the book you've written, which I'll show here, Turn the Tables on Trauma, and give us your 2-minute top practical leadership tip.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Jacqui Wilkinson. I've recently written a book called Turning the Tables on Trauma, overcoming many different adverse childhood experiences in my life dealt from my parents, but using that pain that I had to endure, learning from it to help others learn how to overcome and to build healthy healing strategies into their lives, which will lead to deeper fulfillment and happiness, which we're all seeking. Who doesn't want to be more happy, right? And that's what my intent is now, is to just spread that understanding and that you are enough despite, what cards you may have been dealt in your childhood. And my leadership top tip is it's all about leadership begins with self-leadership, self-awareness, and just innate emotional intelligence, really understanding what your strengths, your weaknesses are, but also what you value. What are your core values? And are you living your life aligned to your core values? Because when we're aligned to them, we find deeper fulfillment and happiness in both physical body, mind, and spirit. And when we're misaligned, that's where that creates the anxiety and the tension. So those values are really key to understand yourself better. And authentic leadership, it requires, in my opinion, to embrace vulnerability, viewing it as a strength and not a weakness. Because when we lead with integrity and purpose in times that can be really challenging, it helps us to address the really tough conversations. And brave leaders should lean into having those hard, tough conversations that they'd rather not, because those are probably the most important conversations to have. And I also believe that, all types of leaders, whatever you are, you will lead abuse survivors. Given the statistics that I've just mentioned, it's very prevalent. So please lead with kindness and empathy, because you never know what that person who stood before you has been through. And it might have been a life of absolute delight and joy, but there might have been many challenges that they've had to overcome and face. And so that support is always empowering for them. And we mentioned before, don't judge a book by its cover. It's one of my strongest proverbs that I hold, and it's really true, because it teaches us that the stories and struggles that each individual carries, shouldn't be judged.
Well,
And
final one.
yeah, and finally, I think survivors who struggle with mental health, that there's the stigma, and the stigma creates silence, and that silence creates abuse thrives on secrecy. So the silence is what actually creates the shame. So when we allow open space and an environment that is welcoming for people to talk, to open, to share, and it might just be a one-to-one, it actually helps create that ripple effect, which helps to build resilience.
Jacqui, thank you very much for writing your book, Turning the Tables on Trauma, for your support for the Inspiring Leadership Foundation and the other young men and women who've been through abuse and trying to turn their lives around. You are truly a role model, and it's been an honor having you as a guest.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been an honor and a privilege to actually speak to you, Jonathan. And I'm so grateful, actually, that the story that I wrote enabled us to connect back in January. It's amazing that life happens for you, not to you. And I
Yeah,
firmly believe in that.
so true. And you meet people for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. And I think we met for all three, Jacqui. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Keep up the great work. Thanks.